Victoire Pisa in front. They're drawing to the judge. Victoire Pisa in front and wins for Japan.
See the stars racing away. Perfection in equine form. A horse of a lifetime.
Harbinger copes with the rising class to run them ragged.
A horse who is pure class, Frankel, has destroyed them from halfway. An amazing performance.
She is unbeaten and still the undisputed champion of the world. Black Caviar by 2 lengths eased up.
Here's now, fights on! Here's the wire! Desperately close! 'Tis now, wins it for America!
Welcome to Racing Roundtable on America's Horse Racing Network, TVG. Our topic this week, American racing and the quality of it versus the rest of the world. And I must declare this at the top of the show, I am an American. And as such, I believe that America is a leader in the global community in all things, including horse racing. But what has happened to American horse racing on the international stage? Consider the World Thoroughbred rankings over the last 5 years. Just once, over the last 5 years, this independent body has found an American horse to be #1 in the rankings. That was Curlin in 2008. And it was a tie that year for Curlin. He wasn't even a dominant horse considered on the world rankings. And think about last year in the Global Thoroughbred rankings. There was no horse in the top 10 from America. Some have Riley said, while there is Frankel for Europe, while there is Black Caviar for Australia, there's Rapid Redux for America, a former claimer. To talk about this subject of where America stands in the world of thoroughbred racing, joining me here on the set in our TVG studios in Los Angeles, my colleague Simon Bray has a unique perspective, having started his career over in Europe and eventually coming to America and now being a permanent fixture here on TVG. And for our TVG viewers, Graham Cunningham, who is familiar to everyone, joins us usually around the Breeders' Cup, but he's in town this week and desperately wanted to contribute to this conversation about America and racing in the world. And also making the drive all the way up from Del Mar, the vice president of racing there, Tom Robbins. And Tom, I want to start with you on this subject because I brought up the World Thoroughbred rankings. You are part of the committee that puts this ranking together at the end of the season. Tell us how this comes to be and who participates.
Well, let me first say, I don't think we need to panic quite yet about the demise of racing in America. Todd, it is, and let me first also say that the structure of racing in America is different than it is around the rest of the world. And by that I mean handicap ratings are what drives most other countries. We are the ones that are unique in America. As most viewers out there know about American racing, we have maiden races, maiden claiming races, a plethora of claiming allowance races, and then we get into the stakes races, the grade 1, 2, and 3 races, the higher echelon of our racing community, our horse community. And those differences that exist with the other countries, they are a rating-centric world that we don't exist in, other than the fact that we handicap some races that we run on a daily basis around the U.S., but not to the extent that handicap and ratings drive all the other races that are run in other parts of the world. And where we are common, where we do share similarities, are at the upper echelon of the horses, the stakes races, the grade 1, 2, and 3 levels. Known around the world, it's the group 1, 2, and 3 levels. But that's where we share some common structure of racing.
Well, when we look at the rankings from last year that you participated in and putting this list together,
right.
I mean, was this truly a year where no American horse deserved to be on this list?
Well, I don't think anybody would be surprised that 2011 American racing was not a above par year. It was a below par year. Our highest rated horse was Drosselmeyer by virtue of his win in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And but I don't think you can choose any one year and say, let's look at how racing is in any particular country. I mean, you can go back to 2006. You wanted to go back to 2008. 2006, Invasor was the leading older internationally rated horse in the world, and 2 3-year-olds from the United States shared the honor at the top. So, you know, there are ebbs and flows. Just, you know, what we're hearing now is people are excited about this particular crop of 3-year-olds running. This might be a good year for 3-year-olds. Last year was maybe an average or slightly below average group of 3-year-olds.
Graham, as you get set to answer this question, remember Tom Robbins is sitting next to you, who participates in the World Thoroughbred Rankings. When you look at the lists that are out there, most would accept the World Thoroughbred Rankings as the list because it's an independent body with people who work in jurisdictions all across the world. They come together and then they find a way to come to this consensus. But then there is the time form rankings, which you're intimately familiar with. They kind of present the same view that America's far behind the rest of the world. Which do you think is the most accurate reflection of the best thoroughbreds in the world, the time form list or the World Thoroughbred Rankings?
It's a very good question. Hi, everyone. Great to be here, first of all. A cynic once said that ideally, to get something done very well, a committee should consist of 3 people, 2 of whom are absent. Now, that is a cynical view of things. The World Thoroughbred Rankings do a tremendous job. Timeform do a tremendous job in a slightly different way. I used to work for them. I have a vested interest, which I'll declare right now. But they both, and this is the crucial point here, they both point to a somewhat worrying, I won't say alarming, a somewhat worrying dip at the top of the American pinnacle. Now, any scientist would tell you that it's very dangerous to take a 1-year, 2-year, even 3-year slot as evidence of a strong, significant trend. I had a good chat with Simon Rowlands, Timeform's head of product development and handicapping, who is absolutely adamant that it's too short a time. But he said, if you're asking the same question in 12 months or 2 years' time, a 3, 4, 5-year period perhaps, then concern will grow. What are the reasons for this? There are probably many and numerous. But I agree with Tom in many ways. We could be looking in as short a period of time as 3 months, and there could be a superstar colt or filly emerged who may be ready to step up to the plate and take on a horse like Franklin. So it's too early to get alarmed, and I'm not here specifically to bang the drum for Europe, but in this case, I will. At the moment, you can see from those numbers with Frankel, with Harbinger, with See the Stars, with Zarkava, with Goldikova, who's hardly got a mention in all this. We have had a golden era in Europe for the last few years, and we need to enjoy it.
But let me ask Tom real quick, jump in. How have those ratings come to be, Tom? We know how Timeform operates, independent handicappers. They have kind of a neutral perspective. But how do the World Global Rankings work? I mean, you're representing, I'm guessing, North America. We have racing secretaries from across the seas representing their division. So could there be a bias there?
There could be. First, understand that we're all part of the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities. And to be part of that, you have to abide by some of the rules, especially at the higher level, that, you know, specifically the graded and group racing level. And what they try to do is establish standards, consistent standards for each country, depending on their size of population, in terms of how many races they can have at the graded or group level. And so this is how America got involved. I could talk to any trainer, 9 out of 10 trainers, and they would say, what are you talking about, international ratings? We have no idea what you're talking about. This is not a common thing for the American horseman to understand and appreciate, but it is something that's necessary to be part of this international globalization of racing, and in terms of how each country decides, evaluates their stock, the horses, the quality of the horses that are running in all these group and grade 1, 2, and 3 level races.
I want to bring Steve Haskin into the conversation. He knows American racing very, very well, but he also knows it on an international level as well. And you can find Steve Haskin at bloodhorse.com. He makes many contributions there. He joins us now from Hamilton Square, New Jersey, via Skype. Steve, what about this whole idea? We tend to, with American racing, think, okay, well, everyone's chasing us. We're the leader, and now we're worried that we've dropped back. But is it the other way around? Were we ever on the lead? Are we actually just trying to catch up?
Well, that's the main point. That's where everybody's got it backwards. First of all, I agree with what everyone says. It's way too early to panic here. We had one off year. Secondly, you know, it's all relative. What we do in this country, what Europeans do there on the grass, what we do on the dirt. I mean, Curlin was the highest ranked horse in the world, but he looked ordinary on the grass. So how can you compare the American horses to European horses? Only when they meet head and head. Doesn't matter what the Europeans do over there and what we do over here, because it's two totally different worlds. But yeah, I'm putting a different spin on this because I think we're looking at it backwards. It's not a question of whether the Europeans have caught up to us. It's more about us not catching up to the Europeans. They've been here a lot longer than we have, and our horses trace back to them. The reason Europeans still produce superior grass horses is because it's the grass horse and not the dirt horse that's revered as stallions over there. Our breeders don't give a hoot about grass horses because they're all about speed, and they're not going to breed top brood mares to grass horses. If you look at the early days of the Washington, D.C. International, which is the one true international race that there really ever was, you'll see that many of the American horses who defeated the Europeans and the other foreign invaders back then were great dirt horses. They were top-class dirt horses because we didn't have the so-called grass horse the way we do now. We had some, obviously, but if you look at the winners of the DC International, you've got Kelso and Mongo and Bald Eagle and Fisherman, even horses like TV Lark who could go both ways. Those were days of Roundtable. These were just great horses, whether it would be dirt, and these horses happened to transfer their greatness onto the grass as well.
Steve, I want to go back to one of your points. We have a race coming up at Turfway Park, so we're going to rejoin you again. But he is almost suggesting, and I want to clarify that with him, that maybe the DC International is more of a gauge than what the Breeders' Cup has become as far as determining great horses internationally. But Simon, it bears repeating what Tom was alluding to and really what Graham was kind of getting into. It's so different over here, our racing program, compared to what they have in Europe and in other parts around the world. It's maybe not even a fair comparison.
Having spent the first 20 years of my life growing up in England, the last 20 here in the United States, it's chalk and cheese. It's apples to oranges. The best dirt horses are here in the States. The best turf horses are in Europe. And the results play out every year in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, how often do the Europeans come here, or throughout the year, come here with turf horses and they just clean up?
Really, Japan has increased the quality of their breeding over the last 30 years immensely. Europe's always grown good horses. The country of Brazil in the last 30 years has really increased the quality of their products. The other South American countries have produced good horses all along. So I think everybody in the world is just trying to raise a good horse, and it just depends on which year who has the best.
Well, as far as grass racing is concerned, Europe is way ahead of us. A lot of people here, they poo-poo the grass racers, the stallions at least. So, you know, mainly they're about grass and we're about dirt. That's the way it sums up. And as far as catching up, or us catching up to them, I don't think that'll ever happen as long as we have dirt.
I think the U.S. is still on top, but some of the other countries are buying a lot of stock here and then from England, mainly from here, and improving the breed there.
No, I still think the U.S. Has the best breeding. Foreigners come here and buy horses at the sale in Kentucky and other sales in Florida, and they go and they take them back to Europe, and they do very well with them. And then we come back and buy them and give them 10 times the amount that they paid for them.
Some of the trainers here in America weighing in on the topic, where does American racing rank with the rest of the world? Welcome back to Racing Roundtable on TVG. I'm Todd Schrupp. Very pleased to be with Vice President of Racing from Del Mar, Tom Robbins, Graham Cunningham here, and my colleague Simon Bray. Simon, you were getting to the idea that, look, this comparison, U.S. racing versus the rest of the world, is chalk and cheese. So I'm going to go to Graham to decipher what's chalk and cheese and what is he talking about?
I'm going to have to agree and disagree here. They are chalk and cheese. They're two completely different disciplines. But believe me, if dirt horses had recorded those top quality performances, they would be reflected in the Well Thoroughbred rankings. They'd most definitely be reflected in time form racing. So there has been a dip. It's a small sample at the moment, but it is a concern. On a broader point, Europe has this buccaneering spirit, by and large. I'm banging the drum for my own continent, but we are prepared to take things on. Americans seem content. They invented the Breeders' Cup, and we owe them a great deal for that, but they still seem content to occupy their own jurisdiction. And all these sports like golf, look at golf, it used to be dominated by Americans with a few Europeans. Now, if you look at the world rankings, it's a global phenomenon. Guys from all over the world. Tennis is the same. It's hard to find a US player now in the real top rankings of the men's game. So I think it's a big, big positive for these sports. Racing needs to embrace it. America needs to embrace it as well.
One thing I want to just pick up on is to what Ron McAnally said. I was going to bring that up. I thought that was the most pertinent soundbite we had there. What he said at the end of his conversation is that most of these horses originate here in the United States. Let's not forget that. When most of these horses, these European champions that we're talking about, what do they have after their name? They have two parentheses with a KY usually, a Kentucky bred. Let's be honest. So, I mean, that's a very good point he brought up, that most Europeans come to the US, they buy the horses, they take them back, but they did originate here in the United States.
You'd get the impression, though, through our conversation that racing just exists in continental Europe and here in North America. Oh, by the way, they have it in Australia, and one of the most exciting horses in the world is Black Caviar, undefeated and untested, but is not raced outside of Australia. Joining us on the phone now for this topic about U.S. racing versus the rest of the world is Gary Crisp. He is the Timeform Australian handicapper. He's had that position for nearly 12 years now, since 2000. He also is the co-founder of the award-winning internet site racingandsports.com. You should definitely check it out. Gary, there's a lot of talk about Black Caviar, who she's beating in Australia. We kind of heard this with Zenyatta when she went on an undefeated streak here in America. She has to step up and maybe beat better horses. But in the case of Black Caviar, let me ask you this question from this perspective. If they had a choice, putting the race aside that they would be in, what would prove her ability more? Winning a race in continental Europe or winning a race here in North America in the United States?
Well, I think probably in Europe, and in recent times, Australian sprinters have tended to dominate the scene in Europe, and that seems to be the litmus test, certainly in this part of the world anyway. And I think that, like you say, there is this view now that she's beating, sort of the same opposition all the time. And of course, you made a very good point about Zenyatta, and a similar sort of case there, and also Frankel, similar sort of case there. And also the size of the fields, people have made comments about that. But if you look at Zenyatta's record, she quite often had, defeated fields of under 10, size under 10, mainly around 6 and 7 runners. Black Caviar's probably average of about 7 or 8 runners. Frankel, something similar. So it's not an argument that holds any water as far as I'm concerned. And Black Caviar has been tested a few times here, most notably last Saturday in the Lightning Stakes, where she did something that has not been done here before, to my knowledge, and that is to drop back 400 metres at Group 1 level in the space of a week and take on a super sprinter like Haylist, who would hold his own anywhere in the world. This horse has got a Timeform rating of 131. He's a super sprinter in his own right, and yet Black Caviar, the times that she's met him, she's beaten him 4 times already. I mean, that in itself, I think, is a sign that she's a superstar. I mean, Haylist will probably go to Royal Ascot and run in the King's Stand, and you'll see there just how good that horse is. And, of course, hopefully Black Caviar on the Saturday in the Diamond Jubilee. But, I mean, you go back through history and time, I mean, champion horses, they do beat up similar sorts of opposition all the time. I don't think it's any reason to discredit their performances, though.
Can we end this discussion, though, with a trip to Royal Ascot and the Breeders' Cup? That would certainly put an end to this whole discussion, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that she'll certainly go to Royal Ascot. She'll almost certainly, I think, come back via Asia, either through Japan or Hong Kong later in the year. I think that's in the back of their mind. I think, one of the big changes I think that's happening in global racing is the Asian influence. Hong Kong particularly, and also emerging jurisdictions like Singapore, and of course China's sizzling along in the background there. These jurisdictions have enormous wealth. They can afford to buy top-class horses from anywhere in the world. And I think when you talk about international meetings, the Hong Kong international meeting in December is probably getting as close as you possibly can to a true international flavour, because you do have horses from all around the world, including the US and Australia, Europe, Japan. I mean, it is, in a sense, getting close to what I would think is a true international contest, and they're racing there is just getting better and better.
I think that's a great point you bring up, Gary. I think Japan, as far as the Asian countries, has been the template of what's going to happen in some of the other Asian countries. Remember, we exported a stallion from the United States called Sunday Silence many years ago. He has turned out to be the Saddler's Wells or the Stormcat of Japan. He's kind of their founding father as a stallion. And these horses have come a long way. I mean, just look at the Japan Cup. The first, I think, 21 runnings. The foreign horses won, I think, 21 times, 18 times out of 21 runnings. Now that is completely reversed. The last 10 runnings, there have been 8 domestically based winners. Look what we've seen with Victoire Pisa, with Deep Impact going to the Arc and running okay there. We've seen horses in Japan really grow the last 10, 15 years or so. And I think what Gary's touching on, that growth is going to happen in some of the other Asian countries as well.
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised when we were talking about the World Thoroughbred rankings. Missing last year in the top 10, Tom, was the Japanese Triple Crown winner who went on to beat older horses as well in Ofev. So, you know, again, you have a representative that knows Asian racing very well on that panel. But as we talk about these rankings, it almost seems Eurocentric in some ways.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case, and I'm not sure you've got the list in front of you that horse didn't make it.
Yeah.
Or where was he specifically?
He wasn't in the top 10,
yeah,
I don't
2000.
think.
Yeah. So when Franco Black Caviar, Sirius des Aigles, Dane Dream, Canford Cliffs, Rewilding, Dream of Headache, Celebration, Nathaniel, and So You Think would have been the top 10 from last year. So there's 3-year-olds on the list, but he was not one of them. And look, I mean, if you go back through the last 5 years, there's 2 Japanese horses to show up in the top 10 over the last 5 years. I know, again, there's a representative there, but sometimes in this conversation, it seems like we're leaving it to 2 continents and that's it.
Well, you know what I think? Basic handicapping principle is the individual horse is the winner of the race and what they accomplish, but it's what's behind those horses as well and the depth of quality of those races.
And that could be debatable in the 3-year-old series.
There's no question about that. I watched a lot of those races at 20-horse fields, maybe 8 illegitimate 3-year-olds in there, you know.
Before we let Gary go, Gary Crisp is on the line, an Australian racing expert, and he did go. But he did suggest that Black Caviar winning in Europe would be more important than Black Caviar coming to the United States and winning in the Breeders' Cup. And it seemed that Steve Haskin was kind of saying the same thing. He longs for the days of the DC International because that was a true test of great international horses and great horses here in America, maybe more so than the Breeders' Cup. Has the Breeders' Cup lost the mantle of the World Thoroughbred Championships?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is the first, the original, and the best. And there's some knives out for the Breeders' Cup nowadays, and people say that, you know, it isn't a bona fide world championship. It's a little bit like Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst of all systems apart from the other ones. And this is a fantastic series of races. And from a Euro perspective, yes, Hong Kong's terrific. Yes, the Dubai Carnival is a great launch pad for the year. But we want to win Breeders' Cup races. We want to establish horses as champions in Europe and then to come over and beat the best that America has to offer. And if that involves a change of surface, it always involves a long journey, etc., so much the better. It adds to the legend, it adds to the luster of that horse if they can do it on both sides of the Atlantic. Many have tried. A few have succeeded, and I go to the Coolmore angle. Coolmore, arguably the most powerful breeding and training operation on planet Earth. They have thrown everything they have at the Breeders' Cup Classic. Giant's Causeway, Hawkwing, Galileo, George Washington, all sorts of top quality horses. So You Think, the latest to try and fail. They see that race on dirt as the pinnacle for their very best horses. And I'm not going to argue against their judgment.
Steve, am I hearing your comments right? When you were longing for the days of the DC International, was it almost a statement that the Breeders' Cup has not kind of taken that place?
No, exactly. You know, the one thing what Graham says, first of all, the Breeders' Cup is as great as an event as it is. It's not the first and it's not the original. If you're looking for international competition, then you have to go back to the Washington, D.C. International. That's what international
race.
What's that?
It's just an isolated race. This is a series of championship races.
Well, I know, but we're talking about international competition. I mean, you're talking about the Breeders' Cup. It's a series of races, but it's United States versus Europe. That's not international. It's United States versus Europe.
Steve, the others aren't barred, Steve.
What's that?
The others aren't barred. They can come.
I'm with Graham on this. I mean, people can look to the Dubai World Cup Carnival and say, yes, more nations compete in the Dubai World Cup Carnival. Horses from India, horses from Uruguay. But the Jamaican bobsled team, Steve, also competed at the Olympics. Just by participation, of multiple countries, I don't think makes it a stronger event. I think you have to look at the quality of horses rather than horses just coming from Uruguay, Peru, India. That's my take. Those horses in Dubai, some of those participants, if they came to the Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships, they'd be 80, 50 to 1, I think.
Well, I'm not talking about quality now. I'm just talking about the concept of international competition. I mean, if we're going to have the Breeders' Cup and not have Australian horses or not have South American horses in there, I'm not talking about horses from Peru. I'm talking about horses from Argentina and Brazil, and you saw what Invasor did from Uruguay. You're looking at Europe. Well, that's great. Whatever happened to Germany and Italy? I mean, Germany. How many German horses and Italian horses come for the Breeders' Cup? Again, I'm not denigrating the Breeders' Cup in any way. I love the Breeders' Cup.
They have to be good enough.
That and international competition. I mean, we used to have horses come for the DC International. We had one of the best horses that ever came here was from Russia. We had horses from Sweden and Norway. Granted, these weren't great horses, but they were certainly intriguing. But you've got to include the Southern Hemisphere horses, to me, to make it a true international competition. That's what Dubai does. And again, the United States versus Europe it's great, but is that the end all of international competition?
But that goes back to my point. I mean, if the Italians aren't coming. Why? Because there's 20 other horses ahead of them that are already proven that they're much better than, say, an Italian or a German representative.
I want to pick up on this. We do have some racing action to get to at the Meadowlands, but Christina Olivares did an interview with Nick Smith, who's the head of communications for Ascot as well as international racing, and he basically said the ship had sailed as far as the Breeders' Cup being a truly global event because it's become more of an American event because of the nomination process, and that's another part to this that I think ties into the point that Steve Haskin is making. So we're going to talk about the Breeders' Cup and the changes they need to make to maybe bring more of those horses back in internationally and truly make it a global event rather than what Steve says, predominantly Europe and America. We're getting into our discussion here, U.S. versus the world, and it's turned to the Breeders' Cup. We'll stay on that, but we want to hear from you. Pick up the phone and give us a call if you have a question or a comment about something that's come up on the show or have something to add that we haven't covered when talking about the quality of racing in America as it relates to the global thoroughbred racing stage. As mentioned, the Breeders' Cup has become the championship moment in the fall here for thoroughbred racing in America, but it has also been billed as the Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships. Joining us now on the phone is the president and CEO of Breeders' Cup Limited. That would be Mr. Craig Fravel. Craig, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Todd. I'm glad to be on.
Obviously, you have taken the initiative, your organization, over the last few years to basically move this event, the Breeders' Cup, into the future. But what moves have you made to improve international participation?
Well, I think, we have a new international stallion program to try and attract more interest from stallions, not only in Europe, but in South America, Australia, and Asia. And I think that's been a very successful program that, we won't see a lot of effects from that outside of Europe in, this year and perhaps next year, but 2-3 years down the road, I think we expect to see a lot more horses eligible to participate in the Breeders' Cup, and I hope that's going to be a real major step forward in internationalizing the sport.
Plus, Craig, this is Simon, plus the travel concessions, right, from your Win and Your In series, those races all around the world, those travel concession payments have certainly helped as well, correct?
Well, I think the Challenge program has really helped extend the brand of the Breeders' Cup. When I've traveled around, I've gotten a lot of interest from tracks around the world. I'm not sure if you guys are hearing me because I'm getting a lot of interference on my cell phone here, but
we're hearing you fine.
Okay, good. It's really been a very positive thing for the Breeders' Cup to have its brand at tracks around the world. And we've had Breeders' Cup Challenge races in Australia and Japan and throughout Europe, and wherever I've been, I've had people come up to me and actually ask for their races to be included in the Breeders' Cup Challenge Series. We've had a lot of inquiries from South America, Argentina asking us to be part of that series, and I think it's always nice to be wanted.
Do you take umbrage, though, when people say an event like the Dubai Racing Carnival is more of an international event and a true test of the best horses in the world versus the Breeders' Cup? Or is the Breeders' Cup many mission statements?
Well, you know what? I think as long as racing around the world prospers, the Breeders' Cup should be happy to be a large part of that. And I don't take umbrage to it because I think that there's room in the world for, so many great championships. I think the one thing we ought to be doing is thinking about how we can make all these events better and giving more opportunities for owners to showcase their horses, to enjoy a great racing experience. And I welcome things like the Dubai World Cup as really positive developments on the world racing scene. That's been nothing but a great thing for world racing.
Craig, thank you for taking time with us, and we look forward to the Breeders' Cup coming back this fall to California. And we have been talking heavily now about the Breeders' Cup. Is it truly the World Thoroughbred Championships? I mentioned in an interview that Christina Oliveira's had with Nick Smith. He is the head of communications in international racing for Ascot, and you have obviously seen great coverage we brought to you during the Royal Ascot meeting, but Ascot is obviously a destination race course, one of the best in the world, and there has always been talk, should they host a Breeders' Cup outside of North America? Would Ascot be willing to do that? Christina Oliveira has posed that question to Nick Smith.
Well, that's a difficult question because the world has moved on. I think in the previous generation, sort of 10 or 15 years ago, the answer to that might have been yes. But I think the idea of shipping hundreds of American horses out of their country is just too much of an ask. I mean, it's an American event. It is funded for and put on for the American breeders, and we visit with 20, 30 horses. I mean, to reverse that would be very, very difficult. And equally now, of course, we have British Champions Day on, which is unfortunately this year just 2 weeks before the Breeders. 2 weeks before the Breeders' Cup, which makes which means that we're trying to build that day up. So hosting the Breeders' Cup now is not an option. But let's be honest about it, it never really was.
Yeah, there's probably some logistical issues there as well, but Tom Robbins, who's with us, Vice President of Racing at Del Mar, obviously Del Mar would like the opportunity to host the Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships, and a guy you know well, Craig Fravel, is on the phone with us now, the President and CEO of Breeders' Cup Limited. He did make a fair point, and that is, look, it's not that the Breeders' Cup has to be the defining event. It can work in concert with these other big events around the world. Racing can only benefit.
No, I absolutely agree. I think Craig made the right point. We celebrate all of the major events around the world. They just don't have to be in America. And yes, Del Mar would love to host a Breeders' Cup. We have to do a few things. We have to make a few alterations, but hopefully those things can happen.
Make as many as Ascot. Yeah, they don't have to put in a dirt course.
And by the way, Graham has yet to go to the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club, so that'd be a good excuse for you to get down there, although you should go there anytime.
I don't think you'd get too many dissenting voices from European media if the Breeders' Cup were to go to Del Mar.
We want to hear your voices throughout the show, and Simon, you monitor all the social media, and people have been tweeting on this topic of U.S. racing versus the world. Claire Novak, an Eclipse Award winner, said this: North American racing continues to fall further behind the rest of the world in breeding racing of top quality thoroughbred athletes.
Well, I mean, she's got a point, but it's all cyclical, I think. Yes, we've exported some of our good stallions. Sunday Silence went to Japan, as I mentioned. Dane Hill went down to Australia from Europe, of course, and proved to be a top sire there. But I think there's a lot of dynamics that work into that statement there. I think in the last couple of years we've had the economic downturn. Less mares have been bred, less horses are out there, and I think that's why.
Is the foal crop down in Europe in the way it is in here in America?
Yes, it is down. I don't know whether it's quite as much, but it is down. So it's happening all over the world. And I take Claire's point there, but America still breeds top quality horses, and it can take one horse to turn bust into boom.
And and back to our point about 30 minutes ago, what is Sheikh Mohammed? Is he the leading buyer at Keeneland September sales every year? Yeah, I mean, they're taking the majority of the American horses back to Europe.
It would be an overreaction to, as Mark Twain said, reports of the death of American racing, the demise have been greatly exaggerated.
Good, I was getting a little bit worried there. We do have another tweet coming in on this subject about U.S. racing, where it stands. And this comes from a familiar tweeter.
Yeah, this is a follower that sends me a lot of tweets on a daily basis. Gambler's Life. He says, since Frankel is on the Team World, they easily win. There's no argument here about U.S. versus the world. The biggest name in U.S. racing is a starter $5,000 allowance horse. sad but true. Of course, that's rapid redux, so he's referring to.
Yeah, there's, I don't know if you've noticed, but there is an elephant in the room at the moment. The subject we haven't touched on, a subject that may well roll out of what Claire tweeted just now.
You're not about to say medication, are you?
The M word. And it has to be touched. I know you covered this in great detail in a roundtable program a couple of weeks ago, but we have to mention medication and we have to mention the dip at the top of the American pyramid and say, are the two linked?
Well, and the problem, too, and we're seeing this now, Tom, is there is no uniformity of opinion on how we should handle the medication issue. The Breeders' Cup took the bold step regarding 2-year-old races at the next round of the Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships. And now, Simon, there's a report at bloodhorse.com that we're taking a step backwards outside of the Breeders' Cup on that issue.
Yeah, this was breaking news this afternoon. There were going to be 2-year-old races, you know, that weren't going to have Lasix throughout the U.S. Tom could touch on this probably a little better than I could, but they announced this afternoon that that has been pushed aside, and now they're going to continue to let 2-year-olds race with Lasix, at least for the foreseeable future, because from what I understood, if a 2-year-old graded stakes race ran with Lasix, they were going to lose their graded status, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that too difficult to overcome all the different racing jurisdictions in the U.S. Breeders' Cup has an opportunity to bust through that. It's their money. It's one event, 2 days. We just had too many barriers to get over to really accomplish
What about
this.
Graham's point, though? What if we solved this medication issue, we got on the same page, and maybe we came in line with the rest of the world with our policies? Would we then see an evening of the playing field or better horses? Or is this always going to remain cyclical, as you said? Just 1 year we'll have a good crop of horses. Medication is not as big of a factor as Graham is suggesting. What do you think?
I think it's a highly controversial topic, and whether I'm capable of rendering an opinion, I certainly can, but, I didn't think we'd see anything nearly as controversial as dirt versus synthetic.
Right.
I think this has topped it, and I've heard both sides, and it's a really difficult thing. I mean, is it the inhumane thing not to allow these horses to race? Horses in Europe apparently train on Lasix, but they don't race on it, and obviously, that's not the case in the U.S. We let them go that extra step on race day.
When the Euros come to race in America, they generally get in Rome.
But all I know, when the prize money's big enough, U.S. trainers will put a plane on a horse, fly them halfway around the world for the Dubai World Cup. Look at all the top U.S. horses that have gone there and up against it, supposedly, with the medication rules.
Yeah, I remember Wesley Ward and his dad wearing a top hat at Royal Ascot and winning a Group 1 race there. So, yes, we are willing to travel, even if there are medication restrictions in other jurisdictions. But there is no doubt what people believe right now, the best horse in the world is on the European continent. He is the amazing Frankel. We'll come back with more Racing Roundtable right after this.
Who knows? Could be Frankel.
Right now, game on dude.
I think Frankel or Black Caviar. I mean, they're the two obvious ones. If I had to pick one, probably Frankel.
Obviously Frankel. I mean, Black Caviar's I've been watching all her races, but Frankel is something else.
The way Game on Dude ran here in his last race, he looks like he's something special.
The question being asked of American-based trainers, who's the best horse in the world? And thankfully, Ron McAnally was there to say, yeah, America's got a pretty good one in Game On Dude, but I think most would scoff at the idea of him facing Frankel on any surface at any distance and coming out with a victory. As we mentioned, the founder and CEO of Team Valor, Barry Irwin, is kind enough to join us once again here on Racing Roundtable. Mr. Irwin, I asked this question with the knowledge that Animal Kingdom could probably win both the Dubai World Cup and the Breeders' Cup Classic. Hopefully, it is that type of year. But if you were given the choice and you were trying to elevate your horse's status in the eyes of being one of the best horses in the world, which would you rather win, the Dubai World Cup or America's defining championship race, the Breeders' Cup Classic?
Well, for pure cash, the Dubai race. For prestige as a stallion prospect, the Breeders' Cup Classic.
And when you look at American racing and this thought that we've fallen behind the world, racing all around the world, how do you view this topic? Is the world caught up to us? Were we ever the true leader in this sport?
I don't know if we were the actual leader. I think that England has always been the leader. I think that America, for a long time, was second. I think France was third, Ireland fourth. But no, we've fallen behind, and the reason we've fallen behind is because of the commercialism involved in the raising and the selling of the horses in Kentucky.
And when you take a look at our breeding program and as it relates to the Breeders' Cup, do you think that the Breeders' Cup could become a better event with some tweaks to allow horses maybe a better opportunity to get into the event?
I think the Breeders' Cup it's an interesting couple of days of racing. There are a few races that are held in very high esteem internationally. You have the Classic, you have the 2-year-old male and female on the dirt. You have the mile on the turf. Those are the ones that people everywhere look at. The rest of the races don't carry that same kind of prestige.
And do you think that part of the fact is that maybe we've diluted out the Breeders' Cup a little bit the last couple of years, Barry, with the addition of races like the Marathon and even the juvenile turf races, which I know you were very successful in. What's your take on adding those races? You kind of hinted that maybe it's diluting out the effect of the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. What I always wanted to see is, what we do is we hold it on the wrong day, if you ask me. I think we should hold the Breeders' Cup the same day as the Arc, the first weekend of October. And by doing that, you allow the 2-year-olds an extra month to recover from that and then prepare for the Classic, the 3-year-olds. The way we do it now, running it in the first week of November, is it doesn't give these young horses a chance to recover enough.
But Barry,
we worry about the Arc, getting the Arc winner here and all that stuff. I think we're missing the boat on that.
But
I think we need to take care of our own horses first.
Barry, Graham here. I've got to disagree with you there. The whole idea of the Breeders' Cup is international competition. And if you hold the Breeders' Cup on Arc Weekend, a meeting that's been hugely increased in value and prestige in recent years, then you render the turf null and void, because no star European horse is going to pass up the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe in order to go for the Breeders' Cup turf. So if you want to be parochial and you want to keep it domestic and keep it in-house, then go for that. But if you want a truly international competition, then you have to follow on from the Arc de Triomphe, surely.
I think it's too great a price to pay. And I think our horses have paid it long enough. And the really, really tip-top horses from Europe have not been coming over here lately anyway.
Again, you can't argue the point. If it's all about just taking care of your horses, doing what's best, that's where Mr. Irwin's operating from. So, as you said, Graham, if it's just about protecting the event and the American horses, then fine, run it any day that truly fits. But it does come down to what the event was designed to be.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit. I think, it's the Breeders' Cup juvenile jinx Barry was kind of touching on a little bit. I hazard a guess to take a look back and say any of those Breeders' Cup juvenile horses that won in their respective 2-year-olds years, are they going to perform much better in their 3-year-old year just because that race was held 4 weeks previous? I don't think so. That's my personal opinion.
I'll tell you what, you go back and look at the history of the turf way before the Breeders' Cup and see when New York ran their races and see when they ran a race called the Garden State Stakes and the Gardenia, you'll see that is not the case. We are the most valuable horses in America are our young horses. We need to give them the best shot, and I don't think we've been doing it for the last 15 or 20 years.
And this kind of ties into what Steve Haskins said near the top of the show, longing for the days of the DC International prior to the Breeders' Cup and the way our racing schedule was. Mr. Irwin, we always appreciate your input on the show. Once again, very insightful. Thank you very much. The founder and CEO of Team Valor, Barry Irwin, joining us on this topic of U.S. racing versus the rest of the world. So some final comments here as we start to wind down the show. I got the impression at the top of the show, Mr. Robbins, that you're not too worried. It's a cyclical game no matter where you are in the world, so America can sleep easy tonight. That we'll be back on top real soon.
Listen, I'm putting 2011 behind us. We're in 2012. We've got some exciting 3-year-olds coming alive and on board. right now, so let's just hope for the future.
And Graham, you always carry a maroon passport, but Simon said he was breaking his one back out even though he holds dual citizenship now. And you seem to be rather kind of in the middle about this as well, that the Americans have nothing to apologize for, and we're more of a global community, thoroughbred racing overall.
Yeah, one swallow doesn't make a summer, and 2 or even 3 outstanding years or fallow years do not represent a definite trend. So I'm hoping for big things from American racing this year, but I'm also savoring a golden era in European racing.
And it is a golden era right now, Simon. We are hoping that a horse like Frankel might make an appearance here. And talking to Gary Crisp earlier in the show, didn't sound like we'll see Black Caviar here because she's got a different route to go, and that may include going through Asia, which could be very exciting for our coverage of Asian racing here. But having Frankel over here for the Breeders' Cup would maybe give us a better indication of where America truly stands.
It certainly would. I mean, I think you poll a lot of people within the racing industry, and most people think that Frankel is the best-rated horse in the world right now. The big decision for the connections of Frankel, I've been talking to Graham off camera about this, do they run in the Breeders' Cup Mile, which might look like the logical spot, or do they go for the Breeders' Cup Classic at 1.25 miles on the dirt? That's a question I posed to Graham. You've heard there's some inclinations across the pond that they might go for the Classic, right?
I think if the golden run continues, he's 9 from 9, combined aggregate winning distance of 50-something lengths. If they can keep that to 13 or 14 victories, I think they'll bid to go out in a blaze of glory. What could be more appropriate for Breeders' Cup 2012 at Santa Anita than a horse called Frankel for Sir Henry Cecil, coming up against a top-quality American rival?
And my last take on this real quick, Todd, about as far as the American downturn. I think I'm the only one that has this view, but I think a lot of it has got to do with the economic downturn. If you look, we've been talking about how the Europeans have dominated on the world global rankings the last 4 years. It directly correlates to the economic downturn. There have been less mares bred, less money has been spent here domestically on racehorses. It's expendable income. People are trying to survive in this economy. And look who the leading buyer is. They're the heavy hitters. It's Coolmore and it's Sheikh Mohammed. Our good horses are being bought back or being taken from here at a very, very young age. And we don't have any investors here to compete at that level.
From our guests, I want to give our final comment to Steve Haskin, who's been kind enough to stay up with us in New Jersey, joining us via Skype. And Steve, I know from a rider's perspective, you would love the thought of Frankel coming to the Breeders' Cup and showing up in the Classic with his first start on the dirt against supposedly our best horses on the dirt as well.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter who we have running. I think everybody wants to see Frankel. For some reason, I mean, the American horses, because of Bobby Frankel, have adopted that horse as one of their own, and they really want to see this horse badly. You know, you mentioned before that we have nothing to apologize for. I think we do have something to apologize for. We're never going to beat the Europeans as long as we keep working out with 2-year-olds in 10 seconds and faster at these sales. That's not exactly the kind of foundation you want to build for a horse going 1.5 miles on the grass. And as long as we keep doing that, and it's increasing year by year by working these horses too fast, and we have no horses left by the time the Europeans come here. And the Breeders' Cup, as I said before, it's not the end all. You look at last year, you have a horse like Cape Blanco who comes here, makes 3 transatlantic flights in a single year, and wins 3 Grade 1 stakes. To me, that's an embarrassment. We could not find a single horse to beat Cape Blanco in 3 trips here, and he might have made it 4 had he not gotten hurt in the Turf Classic. So, you know, there's a lot of different angles you look at here. You look at trying to build a foundation. What Barry mentioned before, as far as the scheduling of the races, it's 2 different things. If you're looking at international competition, you have to keep it basically where it is because of the ARC. If you're looking at producing Triple Crown horses for the next year, yeah, you'd like your 2-year-olds to end a little bit earlier, like we used to run the Champagne in early October, which we do now. But the Champagne then was the definitive championship race, with the Garden State Stakes run in late October, early November to solidify that. But listen, I love the Breeders' Cup. I wish they would open it up to the South American horses. There's a world of talent down there that we never get a chance to see. Stop making them pay these ridiculous supplement fees. And I think the Breeders' Cup, it's going to be great. We need races where we're not seeing Dangerous Midge beating Champ Pegasus. We need to see a better quality of horses coming in for these grass races.
Steve, as always, you bring it into clear focus for us. And I would have to say, as he pointed out, it is a wide-ranging topic, U.S. racing versus the world, because it goes into medication, it goes into the breeding program, it goes into the Breeders' Cup, our defining championship event in the fall. But next week on Racing Roundtable, we're going to bring the topic into focus. It is whip usage will be our topic next week. If you have comments for this show, you can call in and leave a message, 888-722-3884. But if you want to email and weigh in on next week's topic, whips in horse racing, you can do that, roundtable@tvg.com. My thanks to Steve Haskin from the Blood Horse, to Tom Robbins, Vice President of Racing at Del Mar, Graham Cunningham, and Simon Bragg. Thanks for joining us on Racing Roundtable.